Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today is podcast number 1363. The topic is Q&A and the title is, should I do touch and go or dead stop deadlifts? Great question. So we had a listener send in a question. They are a competitive bodybuilder, and they were asking, they had listened to some other podcasts and odds and ends, and they send in a question asking if I recommended that bodybuilders perform conventional deadlift, and we're going to kind of go through, deadlifts in general. But should bodybuilders perform conventional deadlifts? And if so, should they do touch and go deadlift variation to have more time under tension to help towards muscle growth? So what I wanted to do today was kind of talk through, who would benefit from doing deadlifts and what performance variation you should use. To give you some extra context, I do think there would be two podcasts that would be very helpful to listen to, if you haven't yet, is podcast 1118. It's a Q&A podcast titled, Should Aesthetic Athletes Do Heavy Squats and Deadlifts? So, in today's podcast, I'm going to tell you that the answer is yes. But if you want to learn why is it yes, and why is it okay, even if being strong in squats and deadlifts doesn't seem like a direct benefit for aesthetic athletes, meaning athletes who just want to build muscle and build shape. They don't really care how strong they are. Well, it's actually still important and still beneficial to do heavy squats and deadlifts. So podcast 1118 will explain why in greater detail. Then we have podcast number 54. It's a training podcast titled Time Under Tension for Muscle Growth. And that'll explain why this person mentioned the concept of time under tension and how that would contribute to more muscle growth. So if you're like, what the hell does that mean? Podcast number 54 is a training podcast titled Time Under Tension for Muscle Growth. So it'll explain time under tension for muscle growth. Pretty awesome. So I like when I get the naming right on some of these, because I'm like, oh, that's so perfect. But it's sad to say how long some of the times the names take me. That's often sometimes worse than actually writing the outline for the podcast. But those are two podcasts that'll be very helpful to add to the information that we discussed today. Now, pretty much any category of lifter would benefit from doing deadlifts. And this is sumo deadlift and or conventional deadlift. I think people should be familiar with how to do both variations, and then they can kind of pick which variation fits their needs more specifically. But that is kind of covered in that podcast 1118. Now, strength athletes, why should you deadlift? Of course. That's why. So if you want to be a super strong athlete in powerlifting, it's one of the freaking events you're tested on. If you're a strongman competitor, deadlift in some variation is almost in every competition. So I've had strongmans argue with me that they don't need to do conventional barbell squats because very rarely are conventional barbell squats actually in a strongman competition. And what do you know? I think it was in the last Arnold games, they had that the Rogues version of the Duffalo bar. I forget what they call it now, but it's a Buffalo bar, like a bent bar, and they had athletes squatting out a huge ass monolift, but they were actually doing a barbell squat. Now that isn't very common in strongman, but it's still very useful to have the muscles involved in a squat being very strong. They often do squatting variations. Now there's almost always deadlifts, so 100% you should deadlift if you're a strength athlete. What about bodybuilders? Why do they need to deadlift? There's a ton of benefits, a ton. In general, when you do the technique correct, you will help build hamstrings and glutes and upper back and even your spinal erectors. So the whole backside of the body. If you're a bodybuilder, now we will be talking about body shaping here after this, but bodybuilding means you're trying to build muscle tissue and you're trying to present yourself with as much muscle mass as possible. It's very, very hard through more isolative movements to get the posterior chain tissues fully very well developed. In a roundabout way, the posterior chain muscles are made for work. So when you do very heavy weight, that's a great way to tear those tissues up and get new protein, new muscle tissue laid down. If you do a lot of isolative work, you can kind of volumize the mass you have, but you're not going to get that thick, dense look. that most bodybuilders want. So doing deadlifts, now they could be rack pulls. You don't have to do conventional deadlifts from the ground. I have some of my aesthetic athletes do a lot of rack pulls because that still gets the hamstrings, the glutes, still gets the upper back, the spinal erectors, but it doesn't have as much lower back risk as deadlifting from the ground does. But there are a ton of posterior chain, backside of the body benefits if you're a bodybuilder to doing deadlift variations. Then, if you're doing body shaping, meaning you're not really trying to look like pack on a bunch of muscle, you just want to have better shape, more quote-unquote tone. You want to have nice evenness to your muscles. Deadlifts still really do help. They're one of the best ways to get the glutes to grow and have that nice kind of seam that you want between the hamstring and glute, the lower glute. You want to have a big differential there. Deadlifts done correctly are really, really good for building up that specific spot where the hamstrings should be transitioning underneath the glutes, but if you've underdeveloped glutes, you won't see that transition. So getting better separation, more crispness to your glute lines, that booty pop kind of thing, really is helped by deadlifts. Now, fat loss. Why in the world, if all my goal is just strip fat off my body, why are deadlifts important? They're very important because they create a lot of muscle damage. Muscle damage can contribute to fat loss because our body requires a lot of calories to fix damaged muscles. So outside of the workout, your body's going to be using a lot of calories to repair those muscles. Therefore, you're burning calories even when you're outside of the gym. We talk about this in podcast number 181. It's a training podcast titled Using Muscle Damage for Fat Loss. So you can learn more about that. So pretty much everybody listening to this, you would benefit from doing some form of deadlift. Definitely worth your time. You should do it. So then the question is, well, in what way should I deadlift? I'm going to cover 4 variations of how you can perform deadlifts. Whether it's conventional or sumo, I'm not talking about the variation in what type of deadlift, just the variation in how you perform the deadlift. There's 4 that I'm going to go through today just because that gives us enough. There's doing single repetitions, where literally you walk up to the bar, you pick it up once, you set it down, you walk away. That's it. Then there's a technique called reset reps, where I walk up to the bar, I get in position, I lift the bar, I set it down, I stay standing where I am, but I let go of the bar, I stand back up. I might take a couple breaths, maybe 10 seconds, regroup myself aerobically, mentally, go back down to the bar, do another single repetition, set it back down. Now, I might do 2, 3, 4, 5 reps like that, but they're called reset reps because you reset between each one. You don't walk away, so it's considered a continuous set of effort. So I might do, say, a reset of like 3 reset reps per set. What I mean by this is I'm going to walk up to the bar, I'm going to do a single rep, stand up, take 5 to 10 seconds, analyze how it felt, think of my cues. I'll do another rep, stand up, think about my cues, do another rep, and then I walk away. I go do another exercise, or I take a longer stretch of rest, and then I come back to it and do another 3 reps where I have a small little short rest in between. So reset reps are back-to-back reps with maybe 5-10 seconds in between. I'm going to talk about why we do those in a second here. Then there's dead stop reps, which is where I deadlift the weight to the top, I set it back down on the floor, I keep my hands on the bar, but I wait for a good full, maybe like 1-2 seconds for the weight to come to a complete dead stop, hence the name, and then I have to restart all momentum, restart all force off the ground. But I stayed in that bottom position. I stayed with my hands touching the bar. So you can do multiple repetitions where the bar comes to a dead stop in between each repetition. Then the 4th version, there's 2 names to it. A common name is what the listener used. It's called touch and go deadlifts. The way I call it, like what I call it with my clients, is called eggshell deadlifts. The difference here is, the difference from the other versions we talked about is with touch and go or eggshell deadlifts, you would deadlift to the top you'd lift the bar to the top, you would lower it back down, you would touch the ground and immediately come right back up. So you're not waiting for the weight to dead stop, you're not waiting for the muscles to release, you just keep constant tension, but you're touching the floor in between each repetition. So I'm not letting the bar set down and come to a dead stop. I'm definitely not taking my hands off of it to do reset reps. I'm just touching and going, touch and go, touch and go, touch and go. The reason why I don't like using the word touch and go is because commonly what people do when they do touch and go deadlifts is they just slam the bar off the ground and yank it back up off the ground. So the quality of it is absolute garbage when people do touch and go deadlifts. They're just trying to rep out as many reps as they possibly can, as fast as they possibly can. It looks like total shit. Horrible. Not really even beneficial. So instead, what I call it is eggshell deadlifts, in the sense that they want the bar to touch the ground like they're touching an egg. And they don't want to break the egg. They want to touch the egg, but they don't want to break the egg. So that means you have to have way more control on the eccentric portion, which is the lowering portion, which is when you actually gather the most amount of muscle damage. That means it's the most important phase for actually building muscle tissue. So on the way down of a conventional deadlift, it actually builds more muscle tissue, once the body gets food and sleep and stuff, than the way up. So you want somebody to control the way down as much as possible. Well, if they're trying to set the bar and touch an egg, that's going to be a crap ton of control. So I like using the term eggshell, not touch and go. Touch and go is they just drop the damn bar and yank it back up and they go 1,000 miles an hour. Trash quality, trash results. So we want to do eggshell deadlifts. So those variations are all slightly different. They're all a deadlift. You can do them all with conventional deadlifts. You can do them all with sumo deadlifts. You can do them all with whatever variation of deadlift you're doing. You're either going to do singles, reset reps, dead stop, or eggshell touch and go. So those are the variations. Now, why would we do any of those? What's the difference? Well, single repetitions, where you just walk up to the bar, you do a rep, then you walk away, that's typically going to be very good technique development for really freaking heavy weight. Or it's technique development, but you want really low volume. So you're just deadlifting on a day when you're actually focusing on squats, or deadlifting on a day when you're actually focusing on something else. You're just getting some deadlift like practice in, but you don't want it to take away from too much of the actual workout. That would be low volume technique work. Or you're doing really heavy freaking singles as if you're prepping to do a powerlifting meet. You're like 2 to 8 weeks away from a powerlifting meet. You're practicing some really heavy singles, getting ready for the meet. Something like that. Then reset reps, which is the ones where you stay in place but you let go of the bar and you stand up in between each one. They allow you to just achieve a little bit of a greater volume within the workout, but it's typically a little bit lighter weight than what you could do for the individual heavy singles. So reset reps is, I might do 3 or 4 kind of individual singles, and then I would walk away, do something else. I'd come back, do 3 or 4 single reps with only like 5 or 10 second rest in between. I walk away, I come back. So this, I might do 4 sets of 3, which gives me 12 total repetitions. But if I was going to do a single rep, to take 3 to 5 minute rest and do that 12 times, that would be ridiculous. It would take forever. So reset reps is a great way to get single repetition technique practice at a little bit of a lighter weight. And it gives you more volume of practice. Then dead stop reps, this is where you get into like, okay, I'm actually really starting to damage the tissues. I'm starting to do work that builds the muscular aspect of my deadlift. Singles and reset reps more so work on technique of the deadlift. Dead stop and touch and go, they actually work the muscles. They beat the crap out of the muscles. They will force the muscles to adapt. So these are more like the workhorse variations, whereas singles and reset reps are more so you're refining your strength. You're refining how to do the deadlift. So dead stop, you're going to absolutely work all the muscles. It's still good like technique work, but it allows for a mixing in of like pretty heavy weight, but getting some volume and time and attention starting to build up. And then touch and go kind of eggshell deadlifts, they're the bread and butter if you want time under tension. This is by far the best way to get time under tension if you want deadlift to lead towards growth. They're also less violent on your joints, so it doesn't take as long to recover from touch and go eggshell deadlifts as it does from the other variations. And you get that quality of time, like time under tension. So still good technique. It's a little bit lighter, it's less violent, but it still gets a good kind of muscle growth response. So those are kind of the 4 variations and why we would do those. So which one is best for you? If you're a strength athlete, all of them, for various reasons and various seasons. So as you're getting closer to a powerlifting meet, you might start to go from eggshell and dead stop variations to start to refine to reset and singles. Then after the powerlifting meet, when you're trying to build your strength up, you might go more towards the touch and go and the dead stops. So when you're trying to build strength, dead stop and touch and go seem to be a little bit better. When you're trying to refine strength, reset reps and single reps tend to go better. Bodybuilders, you're more so going to look on dead stop and touch and go. Touch and go done quality, like the eggshell variation, is really good because it's really light on the joints out of all the other ones. So good time retention, good muscle building. You can blend it into your other workouts. Not much wear and tear on elbows and shoulders and joints and things. But if you do a bunch of dead stop stuff, that does start to kind of wear and tear at the joints. So you got to kind of like cycle that in and out of your program. I really don't think there's much need for reset reps and singles for bodybuilders. Now, I will use them from time to time if I just want some kind of heavy stimulus on their connective tissues and their muscles as an aid or an addition to the work we're already doing with other volume within their training. So I do use it very specifically, and it's more of a case-by-case basis. But in general, bodybuilders would benefit more from the dead stop and the touch and go. Body shaping, if you're not really wanting to add a ton of muscle tissue, you just want to kind of, refine what you have, then eggshell, the touch and go is going to be by far your best ones, as well as fat loss. The eggshell touch and go is probably going to be your best, and that's because it causes the most amount of muscle damage. It burns the most amount of calories while you're doing it, kind of nicest on the joints, has all the benefits you would want for your individual goals. Now, everything I just said was because I have to talk to whoever the hell listens to this. Hopefully at least somebody does. But what I mean by that is this is advice I would give when I'm giving advice to who I don't know, who I don't see, I don't know personally or individually. The clients I have who I do work one-on-one with, you will notice that you might be doing singles even though your goal is body shaping. Or, you're doing a little bit of a different combination than what I have in today's podcast. And that is why I believe in one-on-one coaching, why I offer that service, is because there's generalities that are true, but then there's also what's best for you. And it does take a little bit of bending and breaking the rules sometimes to work with individuals to work on individual needs. So for example, if I have somebody who has a hernia issue, which I do work with somebody who's a powerlifter and has hernia. So actually I have a CrossFitter who has a hernia in their disc that we're working around and still doing strength work with. So in those conditions, we might be breaking some of these rules because we're trying to make things blend between the individual goals we have. I have other people who, like I worked with somebody who has blood pressure issues, so we do not do touch and go or dead stop because it spikes their blood pressure too much. So I tend to have them do reset reps or singles a lot, even though that might seem contrary or not enough for them. It's what works best for their blood pressure issues. So there's about 4 million other variations of why we would sometimes bend these rules. But in general, this is the information that I think would work well for most people. Start with this, tweak it, and kind of, vary it as you need, as you see in your individual needs. If you have any questions about any of that, just reach out to me. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com, and I'll help answer questions. Last thing I want to leave you with is podcast number 721, Q&A podcast titled Common Corrections for Squat, Bench, and Deadlift. Listen to that one so you can kind of critique your own form when you're doing deadlifts to make sure you're doing it the right way. You're building the right muscles, not just thickening your core, which is a big concern for aesthetic athletes. So make sure you have everything braced, everything properly, in proper position, so that way you're building the right muscles. So podcast 721 will help you understand that. Awesome. If you need anything or have any follow-up questions, our email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like today's podcast or the podcast in general, please consider sharing it. The more people we share it with, the more people we can help, and that's the whole goal. So thank you to those who share it. If you share it on social media, that does reach the most amount of people, but even just sharing a conversation with a friend helps a lot as well. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, people who financially support the podcast, which you can now do on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. You can do a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation. Anything is greatly appreciated. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every single day. I would love to keep this for free and without a bunch of crazy ads in it. So thank you to everybody who financially supports the podcast so we can keep it, high quality and keep it high frequency. If you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email at brutaliron@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.